It's rare access into an active NYPD investigation in a case that has a city on edge.
You've got a $300,000 reward. You've got DNA. You've got some of the most experienced detectives in the nation working this case.
Life in prison without parole. That is the sentence for the man found guilty of murdering Karina Vetrano.
Have you ever gone for a short walk or a run around the area on a summer afternoon? For many people, it's a regular, healthy, and harmless activity that improves the quality of their lives. But for 30-year-old Karina Vetrano, it proved to be fatal. This is the case of Karina Ann Vetrano. Welcome back to True Crime Files. We offer our condolences to Karina's family and friends, to all those people out there who will cherish the memory of Karina for the rest of their lives. Who was Karina Vetrano? Karina Ann Vetrano was a 30-year-old aspiring writer and speech pathologist who worked with children with autism in Manhattan. She was born on July 12, 1986 in New York. Her parents, Philip and Kathy Vetrano, had 3 kids, Karina and her brother and sister. Her father, a New York City Fire Department retiree, was one of the emergency workers at the Twin Towers after the September 11th attacks. She went to Archbishop Molloy High School in Queens and graduated from St. John's University with a master's degree. She appeared in a 2013 short film inspired by her writings and was directed by her screenwriter friend Petros Georgiadis. She lived in the same neighborhood in Queens as her parents. NBC New York reported in 2016 that she also worked as a caterer for RV Rooftop at Vetro in Howard Beach. She was also a world traveler, and on her blog she wrote about her life. It's chaotic and unpredictable, but I do believe that on some days it's quite beautiful in all its poetic little tragedies. The murder attracted much attention in the media and was compared to the killing of Vanessa Marcotte, which happened in Princeton, Massachusetts. Marcotte was found murdered under similar circumstances a week before. Less than a week after Vetrano's murder on August 7th, one more New York City resident, 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte, was found killed on a rural road not far from her family home in Princeton, Massachusetts. Marcotte was also killed during a run, and much of the media reporting on the crime linked it to Vetrano's murder. DNA and other evidence proved the murders to have been committed by different men. Vetrano and Marcotte's deaths led to various open discussions and debates about the safety of women who exercise alone. The killing of Karina Vetrano was one of the most high-profile cases in the city in the last couple of decades, due to its randomness and brutality that started a massive investigation. There were numerous debates over social media and in the courtroom that argued whether the prosecutors had the wrong person. On August 2, 2016, in the late afternoon, she went missing during an evening jog in Spring Creek Park, a few blocks away from her home. She ran by herself, despite the verbalized concerns of her father, her usual running partner, who was suffering from a back injury and couldn't join her. She was last seen alive after 5 p.m., just before she walked into the park. During a search, the body of Karina Vetrano was found the same day she went missing, laying on her back in a meadow of weeds. According to her father's testimony at the trial, Vetrano did not respond to her father's repeated phone calls and text messages either, so he became concerned and asked a neighbor, a New York City Police Department police chief, to help find her. The police chief organized a search party, and around 11 p.m., Vetrano's father discovered her body lying face down about 15 feet from the trail. During the investigation, it was revealed that Vetrano had been sexually assaulted. Her legs were covered in scratches and bruises, and her clothing had been taken off. Queens Chief Assistant District Attorney John Ryan said in a statement, "This was a horrifying case. A vibrant young woman's life came to an abrupt and violent end. Miss Vetrano's death was brutal. She was pulled from a park pathway, sexually assaulted, and in her last moments of life, she gasped for air as the defendant's hands tightened around her neck." Vetrano's mom recalled her reaction to finding out her daughter was killed. "I was screaming in the street, and an ambulance tried to put me in because I just had surgery. I saw my husband coming down the block, and we just grabbed each other crying." The following day, an autopsy confirmed that Vetrano's cause of death was strangulation, and her death was declared a homicide. Detectives investigating the case confirmed that she had been hit in the back of the head with a rock, after which she fought back fiercely against the attacker. She bit her attacker with unbelievable force, and her teeth got damaged. When her body was discovered, her hands were gripping grass from the area where she had been dragged off the trail. The strangle marks on her neck were so severe that a handprint was left behind. police officials publicly announced a reward for information leading up to the arrest of Vetrano's killer, and a task force of 100 detectives was initially assigned to investigate her death. The police managed to recover the DNA at the crime scene, but it initially failed to produce any leads. Over 600 DNA samples were examined over the course of the investigation, with none coming up with a positive match. The NYPD also checked over 1,700 investigative reports and followed over 250 leads, but it all seemed to be in vain. For the first couple of weeks, the police were searching for 2 white men, until the investigators learned that the DNA found at the crime scene had come from a black man, whom investigators called male donor A. After that, 384 black men were interviewed and gave saliva samples. The samples were entered into the local DNA index system, a database maintained by the city medical examiner's office. Still, it was not until detectives obtained a DNA sample from Mr. Lewis nearly 6 months after the killing that they found a match. As the case was slowly getting off the headlines, the Queens County District Attorney asked the state to authorize the use of familial DNA. Familial DNA searches identify potential relatives of an alleged killer. A familial DNA search result is only a lead that needs to be followed up and further investigated until a DNA sample of the suspect is obtained and tested. One of the lead detectives in Vetrano's case remembered calling the police on a man wandering near his Howard Beach home around May 30th. Russo then contacted the police officers who answered his 911 call to see if they kept their notes from that date. It was written in the notes that Chanel Lewis was the person wandering in Russo's neighborhood, and police asked for a DNA sample from Lewis. Lewis volunteered to give a sample of his DNA, which matched DNA found under Vetrano's nails and on her cell phone. Lewis, who was living in Brooklyn with his mother and was 20 years old at the time, was brought in for questioning, according to trial testimony. Hours later, he gave a confession and was charged with murder and sexual abuse in February 2017. Although Lewis had no criminal record, he reportedly had a hatred for women and once told a teacher he wanted to stab all the girls at his school several years earlier. He had been taken into protective custody many times and was described as a loner and mentally unstable. Lewis also had several encounters with police in the years before the murder, including 3 summons in 2013, 2 for violating rules in Spring Creek Park, and 1 for urinating in public. An additional incident occurred in 2016 when a 911 caller reported a suspicious male with a crowbar in the backyards of several homes. An NYPD lieutenant who lived in Howard Beach also remembered him lurking around in the area looking into cars and traced him from when Lewis's name and address were taken by police during a report. According to investigators, on August 2nd, Lewis left his home after arguing with his family and went over to the park, where he came across Vetrano and then attacked her. While it is believed to have been a completely random encounter, it is not confirmed if Lewis ever saw Vetrano before or whether he planned the attack. His mother described that upon returning home that night, Lewis looked disheveled with his clothes torn. Lewis claimed he had been mugged by a group of men, although there was no evidence of such an attack, and a police report was never filed. The next day, August 3rd, Lewis's father, who used to work as a school principal, took him to a local emergency room for treatment of scratches and cuts on Lewis's upper body. Hospital records confirmed that Lewis was treated by doctors the day after the murder. Having said that, Lewis's lawyers believe that the police rushed into an arrest because of public pressure to make progress in such a high-profile case. One of Lewis's lawyers, Robert Moeller, told the Wall Street Journal, "It was going nowhere. They were starting to get, I don't want to use the word desperate, but they needed to prove this. They wanted to solve this case. So along comes somebody, and oh, the profile fits." Lewis's family continued to deny his involvement in the homicide. His father claimed he didn't hear or read about Vetrano's death until after Lewis was arrested for it. Lewis's first trial ended with a hung jury. Some jurors were in dilemma due to defense arguments that Lewis's confession was coerced and that the DNA evidence was contaminated. It was only at his second trial that a different jury found Lewis guilty. As the verdict was being read, cheers and applause went up from Vetrano's family members in State Supreme Court in Queens. There was no reaction from Lewis. Philip Vetrano, Vetrano's father, said, "Jubilation, justice has been served." A spokesman for the Lewis family said they will appeal the jury's decision and added, "We knew he would be railroaded. The evidence was extremely weak and the confession was coerced." Prosecutors were bringing out witnesses to testify and tried to prove that the DNA evidence wasn't contaminated and that Mr. Lewis wasn't pressured into confessing to a crime he did not commit, as the defense tried to counter-argue. The lead prosecutor insisted it was 376 billion times more probable it's Lewis's DNA under her fingernails than somebody else's. The prosecutor added, the argument from defense lawyers claiming Lewis gave a false confession made no sense. During the trial, the evidence was mentioned from a cell phone that located Lewis in the area of the park at the time of the murder. It was also mentioned that Lewis's cell phone contained downloaded images of the crime scene and internet searches about second chances. It was argued that Lewis's statements to investigators were inconsistent with evidence at the crime scene. He told the police Vetrano drowned in a puddle, yet autopsy results show she was strangled. He appeared confused at times during the videotaped interview, and some of his responses were unclear.
And was she jogging? Was she coming from the same direction that you came from when you entered the park?
No, we go opposite directions.
Okay. And when you first saw her, where were you? Were you in the grass or were you on the trail?
On the trail.
All right. And were you moving or were you standing still?
Like I was moving, listening to music.
You were walking or jogging?
Walking.
Walking?
Lewis said in a confession, one thing led to another, hitting her and stuff like that. Lewis's lawyer claimed that reasonable doubt exists because there was no video of Lewis entering or leaving the park and no fingerprints or hair or the more precise type of DNA. He said that Lewis's DNA could have ended up on Vetrano through transference if they were in contact with the same surface sometime in the past. The lawyer also pointed the jury to pay close attention to Lewis's behavior in the video of his confession, emphasizing that he was asking to speak to his mother and to watch cartoons while in the police station. The defense also said police racially profiled the African-American Lewis. It was a claim that New York police rejected. One juror at the trial admitted some of the jurors were undecided when the decision-making process started, who then requested to view the videotape of Lewis's confession more times. The juror elaborated his opinion. You always see cases where the wrong person is put behind bars, and then 30 years later their whole life is gone, and you find out they're not guilty. That was in the back of my mind. He also said he was eventually persuaded by the other jurors that the confession was genuine, and there was also scientific evidence to back it up. In the beginning, Lewis kept denying that he had killed Vetrano. But after 11 hours in police custody, including 4 hours in an interrogation room with no windows, he told detectives in a videotaped interview that he had beaten Vetrano. He claimed he killed her because he was angry that his neighbors had been playing loud music. The day after the murder, he went to see a doctor for a hand injury that the doctor said was probably the result of punching someone. Vetrano's mother, Kathy Vetrano, was also called to testify about her last conversation with her daughter. She wasn't called to testify during the first trial. During closing arguments, Kathy Vetrano held a small cross in the courtroom, and Lewis's mother, Veda Lewis, sat at the opposite side holding a Bible. Mr. Lewis's lawyers suggested that the investigation of Karina Vetrano's murder was sloppy because the investigators did not check for DNA evidence at the crime scene or on other parts of Ms. Vetrano's body, aside from her neck and nails. One of Lewis's lawyers, Robert Moeller, said, "This is tunnel vision clouding judgment. You see things that could have been done, were not done." The jury found Lewis guilty of first-degree sexual abuse on April 17, 2019. He is facing life in prison without the possibility of parole.
With respect to murder in the first degree, the sentence of this court is that you spend the rest of your natural life in jail without any possibility of parole.
Shortly before the verdict, the case took an unexpected turn when defense lawyers received an anonymous letter from a person who claimed to be a police officer. The letter said that before the police turned their focus toward Lewis, they had collected DNA samples from at least 360 black men who had previously been in custody in parts of Queens and Brooklyn. The letter also said the police initially thought 2 white men had killed Vetrano. Mr. Lewis's lawyers asked Justice Michael B. Alois for a hearing to determine if prosecutors withheld evidence that would help Lewis's case. The prosecutor argued that the letter was sent by someone trying to derail this case on the eve of summations. Justice denied both of the defense's requests. Sergeant Brendan Ryan said in a statement to CBS News, "The NYPD has painstakingly investigated the murder of Karina Vetrano, and as the Queens District Attorney's prosecution demonstrates, the evidence clearly shows that Chanel Lewis is responsible for her death. Multiple legal hearings and 2 criminal trials over more than 2 years have already exhaustively examined the issues in this anonymous 11th-hour letter, a missive riddled with falsehoods and inaccuracies. The Legal Aid Society, which represented Lewis, said in a statement that Justice Aloise's decision not to hold a hearing put the validity of the entire trial into question and that it would appeal the verdict. They insisted their client did not receive a fair trial. Tina Luongo, Lewis's defense, said in a statement to CBS News, "We received troubling and reliable information indicating that the police withheld critical information about other potential suspects, which was never turned over to the defense. Moreover, we learned that the police approached our Mr. Lewis to obtain a DNA swab as part of a race-biased dragnet, which involved the swabbing of over 360 African-American men in Howard Beach and other neighboring sections of Brooklyn and Queens. In light of this case-altering information, we plan to submit motions on Monday, seeking a hearing as to the prosecution's failure to disclose this exculpatory evidence, and a new hearing challenging the department's unconstitutional racial profiling throughout their investigation." In 2021, nearly 40,000 people signed a petition urging prosecutors to re-examine the case of Chanel Lewis. The petition, which was delivered to the Office of Queens County District Attorney, wants the case referred to the Conviction Integrity Unit. The CIU was founded the year before for the purpose of reviewing past convictions in cases where there are proven claims that the defendant is actually innocent. The petitioners claim that the Lewis case fits the criteria based on a history of prosecutorial misconduct on the part of prosecutor Brad Leventhal, concerns over the use of racial profiling in Lewis's initial arrest, and a mid-trial disclosure of significant scientific evidence were mentioned as well. They argued that there were credible claims by the defense that the confessions the prosecution relied upon in court were coerced by police. Community advocate Michael Thomas said, "We had a Central Park 5. We will not have a Howard Beach 1 with Chanel Lewis. No justice, no peace." The Central Park 5 was a group of Black and Latino youths who were wrongfully convicted and sentenced for the assault and rape of a white woman who was jogging in Central Park in 1989. The tragic case of Karina Vetrano was a case of severe brutality and of random attack by a complete stranger in a public place. Vetrano fought back with all her strength to try and defend her life. She couldn't save herself, but the way she lived remains the beacon of inspiration for all those who stayed behind, and the lives of many were most likely saved by bringing the killer to justice. As one of the members of a foundation dedicated to safety and protection of women said, "I think every woman deserves to be able to go for a walk on a Sunday afternoon without the fear of being murdered. And I think for us, that's really what drove us to do this." If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because that makes this video possible. And here is another one you might enjoy.